Okay, so, well, good morning. I have to say, I commend your curiosity coming to a talk of such serious nature so early in the morning. I hope you've had a good, strong cup of coffee. I've had mine. I'd like to kick things off with a quote from our founder, Arup. Any engineer who doesn't care a damn what his design looks like, as long as it works and is cheap, who doesn't care for elegance, neatness, order, simplicity for its own sake, is not a good engineer. I came across this quote while I was doing some research for a book, which is, I'm pleased to say, is about to be published in mid-November by Prestel, which is a collection of essays by Arup original essays by him on the theme of quality of design in the built environment. And Arup was a philosopher as well as an engineer. He was a keen follower of the arts, and he was deeply committed to architecture. And if that weren't obvious from his built works, it's certainly obvious from his writings. He tells us we demand of a good design that it results in a thing which functions well, looks well, lasts well, and costs little. So you may recognise, paraphrasing of Henry Wotton's firmness, commodity and delight, or if you prefer Vitruvius's first century firmitas, utilitas, venustas. So looking well, or delight, has been an essential constituent of quality in design since antiquity, perhaps forever. So it's hardly surprising then that Ove thought that engineers who didn't care what their designs looked like were not creative engineers, were not original designers. And the problem, as he saw it, was that engineers didn't attach sufficient importance to aesthetics, or didn't care passionately enough about aesthetics. So why is that? Ove was making these comments in the 1960s, and at the start of that decade, C.P. Snow created his controversy through the polemic Two Cultures, where he talked about society, ruling society in this country as being divided by their education into two subcultures. One, a person of science, logical, linear, mathematical, unfeeling. The other one, a person of the humanities, with the complexity of the human condition, poetic, feeling, ruled by their passions. So this was 50 years ago, and Snow said that at this point there was a breakdown now in communication between these two subcultures, that they could no longer communicate with each other. This was 50 years ago, and where are we today? Many of you may recognise the hugely talented designer Patrick Schumacher from Zaha Hadid Architects, who recently wrote that a concern for appearance was now the key differentiator between architecture and engineering. He went on to say that the discourse between these two disciplines continues to diverge. And in fact, he went on to say that any attempt at this point to try and integrate the discourses of architecture and engineering is doomed. Well, it's a truly bleak prognosis, and I think one which would have saddened Ove deeply that his insight had not been heeded. But I'm very pleased to say that this is not the case. And here's just a handful of projects which I offer as evidence of that. These are a few local projects which have been designed and delivered by engineers upstairs in this building, in the design group here. And I think that these buildings demonstrate that the integration of engineering, or these buildings or these projects, are not all buildings, demonstrate that the integration of architecture and engineering is manifest. So these projects speak to more than a technical mastery. I think they speak also to the engineers that design them. They speak to their deep concern for architecture. So to get to the bottom of this conundrum, we ought to be able to say something about what an aesthetic sensibility is. And I'm afraid this is where I start to run into a series of problems, not least of which, like the majority of my engineering colleagues, I actually don't have any formal training in aesthetics. The second problem has come from 20 years of collaborating with design architects, which has led me to realise that architects and critics don't agree either. Ove described aesthetics as a slippery thing. It's certainly a very tricky subject. Could we in this room agree, for instance, if we lock the doors and start having a discussion, could we in this room agree on what we think is a definition of beauty that we could all agree with? This man thought he knew. This is Frederick Leighton, painting this at the end of the 19th century. He was a member of what we now call the aesthetic movement. And here we see a painting which has quite an unusual composition, but it's quite balanced, it's quite harmonious. We see the suggestion of quality and luxury in the sumptuous colour and the folds of her dress and the gauze that lies across her breast. There's a sort of, the whole thing is bathed in a warm light, and there's an overall sensation of calm, a psychological calm that emanates from the piece. So this is a painting that appeals directly to our emotions. And this was painted at the end of the 19th century. And if we wind the clock forward 100 years, fast forwarding through the modern era, but we wind it forward 100 years, Sarah Lucas gives us this, a photographic self-portrait with 2 fried eggs. So hang on a minute, what's going on here? This is a little bit different. This doesn't seem to contain any of the aesthetic principles that Leighton thought was important when he was painting something that he thought represented aesthetics. The lighting is even, it's quite bland. The clothes aren't sumptuous. In fact, they're really quite masculine. In fact, the whole pose is quite masculine. The whole legs akimbo, the feet firmly planted on the ground, very male-looking shoes, which all seems a little bit at odds with the fried eggs, which are about the most unambiguous part of the piece. So what's going on here is Lucas trying to talk to us about something about gender, Is she trying to say something about that? And look at that stare coming right out of the screen. Very confrontational. She's really challenging us. It's not a joke, is it? She's absolutely serious about something. And I think that this starts to talk to something that challenges the objectification, the degrading objectification of women in art. So this is something different to what Leighton did. This appeals to the mind. It seems to have some cognitive value. It challenges us. We've got to think first. We react first, then we think about it. But it also carries an emotional punch. So something of a different kind here. Well, okay, so it's at this point that I actually come across another problem talking about aesthetics, which is a tendency for aesthetics to sort of divide the audience between those that have a curiosity and those that start to feel a little bit hostile. And I can feel some pockets of hostility bubbling around in the room. So let's try and ratchet that up a little bit. Equivalent 8 by Carl Andre. I just thought about something on the way in this morning. Can we just try something? Can I just take a straw poll of people who've seen this before? If you've seen this either in real life or pictures of it, could you put your hand up? Okay, so it's about half. And just to test, if you haven't seen it, if you've never seen it before, could you put your hand up? Okay, all right. So there's a lot of people that haven't seen it before. So those people who haven't seen it before, could you put your hands back up? Okay, now, there's no need to be worried about anything. I'm not going to single any individuals out, so try and answer this honestly. So you haven't seen it before. Can you put your hands down if you like this? Hands up higher, everyone who's left. Can you put your hands down if you don't like this? And the ones left, you're not sure, I take it. Okay, that's really good. I'll come back to the significance of that in a second. Carl Andre, the Tate caused a sensation when they displayed this in 1972, and the public were concerned at the expenditure of taxpayers' money on something that was 120 fire bricks displayed in an art gallery. What did it mean? Was it, who was trying to convince them that this was art? And one of the things that I find about this, one of the reasons why I've included this, and I'd like the people who put their hands up to sort of reflect for a minute on, you hadn't seen this before, but how quickly you made your judgment and your decision about whether you liked it or not liked it or weren't sure. One of the things I've wanted to illustrate with this piece is that in order to enjoy this, you actually have to do a couple of things. One is to look at it for a long time, but the most important thing you have to do is to suspend your judgment. You have to suspend the moment of decision and your prejudices. You have to park the idea that art should be a painting in a frame on a wall, or if it's a sculpture, it should be something that's chiseled or molded or carved. And you have to park your preconception that art is only art if it's on a pedestal. You have to park all of those and then just look at it and spend some time looking at it. And if you can achieve that separation, that sort of disinterested separation, then you start to see, well, I start to notice some things about the piece. I start to notice neatness, order, simplicity. It really now starts to appeal to my sense of tidiness. Those who know me, I might disagree with that, but it starts to appeal to my sense of tidiness. But there's something more than that. You see that each element is treated very much the same. It feels somewhat democratic in that sense. You notice that there is actually some variation in colour. You start to feel the texture. You start to notice that something that was rational now seems irrational. Something that was so organised, why is it so utterly organised? And you start to notice that all the extraneous details have been pared away. And we're starting to actually feel something, or I do, start to feel something about the piece. So this now seems to have something of the cognitive value of Lucas, and it also has, again for me, pass that on to anybody else, it starts to have an emotional value as well. I actually share with you, experience a great sense of joy when I look at this. So, or is it a case of the emperor's new clothes? It does all of this whilst testing at the same time the boundaries between art and non-art. So that leads me into the last problem that I just want to touch on, which is one of taste. And the Turner Prize-winning transvestite potter Grayson Perry recently did a fantastic show on the television on Channel 4 where he examined taste. And I just want to bring up taste. Taste is as complicated a subject as aesthetic sensibility, so I won't dwell on it, but I just want to point out that taste and aesthetic sensibility are parallel realms. They're not the same thing. Taste is influenced by other factors. It's sort of contaminated by our gender, it's contaminated by our nationality. He demonstrated through his television programme the varying taste between working class, middle class and upper class. And just as a sort of trivial example, our taste in trucks in Europe, or lorries in Europe, is not the same as our taste in trucks in the States. So, okay. I think the point I want to make about taste is having taste is fine. Recognising your prejudices about what you want to consume is important, but it's certainly no excuse for not developing your taste in some way. So, back to the aesthetic question. This is just a few examples, just looking at some painting and some photography and some three-dimensional art of how an aesthetic sensibility in one field can translate to other fields. We've looked at visual art, we could have considered music as well. But none of these examples explain why aesthetics is important to engineers. Why should engineers care about aesthetics? You know, one school of thought has it that, you know, if the architects are the masters of aesthetics, why not leave it to them? So we have to try and answer this question. And I had the privilege last week of attending graduate induction. We have had 160 new graduates this year, and we get them together in a hotel, and we do that so that they can meet each other and form alliances amongst each other that last through their careers. But it's also to give them an opportunity for some of our staff to come in and talk to them and tell them some of the exciting things that they'll be doing. But the first thing that they do, the very first thing that they do, is paint. This is the first thing that our graduates do when they join Arup, is paint something. They paint this mural with paint on canvases. And this is, if you can't quite see what it is, but this is the conference goes on, and that's the projection screen, so presentations are made there and the speakers stand in front of that. But that collage, that mural of the Olympic of the Olympic site was painted by our graduates. And we're talking about electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, structural engineers, geotechnical engineers. I met a quantity surveyor, consultants of all different kinds. So why is it that Arup believes so strongly in this that we ask them the first thing they do to paint something? So I have to return to some real-world examples. And what we've done so far is we've talked about an aesthetic appreciation of made things. And what I'd like you now to switch your focus to is an aesthetic appreciation, or the role of aesthetic appreciation during the making of something. And here, delight is not added at the end. Delight is layered in through the solving of the problems and the generation of the solution as we go along. So, it's pretty obvious that to achieve something like this, architects have to be part engineers. I'm not sure how obvious it is that engineers have to be part architect, and that an aesthetic sensibility is necessary for the engineer to appreciate the aim of the architecture. When you have an appreciation, when an engineer has an appreciation, things like this are possible. Bridge engineer Michel Villogeau, thank you for the pronunciation Alistair provided, is no stranger to the value of unity and continuity of shapes which express forces. And shortly after completing this with Norman Foster, he said, "I know much better than architects which are the proper proportions, which are the good lines, and which structure is best adapted to the site." Engineering is as much a visual art as it is technology. Engineering is not science. One of our great scientists said that science can only ascertain what is, but not what should be, and outside of its domain, value judgments of all kinds remain. So engineering uses the rules of science to solve problems, but engineering also uses imagination, creativity, intuition. And I think really this is the key, that in all engineering decisions there is room left over for individual taste and preference of the engineer to enter into his or her decision. And engineers have to manage their own passions and enthusiasms and defer moments of judgment as they choose between different alternatives. And that includes varying the results within acceptable limits. And this is why computers will not replace engineering, because the role of judgment is crucial to the evolution of the solution. So going back to Einstein, value judgments of all kinds remain. Developing taste is one way that helps us refine our ability to make judgments. Is one way that helps engineers refine their ability to make judgments, just as experience is another way. Do you accept that delight is a vital constituent of design? It saddens me that it's not universal, as the evidence in lots of our towns and cities show us. But on the evidence of many of the clients that we work with, I would say that delight is hugely valued, and I suspect it may be the greatest value of all. One only has to think of the success of mobile phone manufacturers to recognise that something more than functionality is celebrated. So I still haven't quite answered the question. We're getting now closer to why engineers should develop this aesthetic sensibility. And to talk to that, just wrapping up now, I had the privilege of listening to Renzo speak over at the RIBA a couple of months ago now, I think. And he made this really interesting comment that really influenced me, which was, he said, we are in a dangerous profession. Now, he wasn't talking about the danger of buildings not standing up, although, you know, that's a robustness is a fundamental constituent of quality as well. But he wasn't actually talking about that. He was talking about the fact that when we design something, if we make a mistake, it's there for a very long time. And that mistake, or the success or the mistake, is embedded in the environment and in society. So I just want to leave you with a couple of last comments from Ove, which were written around the same time that Ove and Renzo were collaborating on the Pompidou Centre, just before, actually. These are words from Ove. Any engineer who aspires to become fit to take charge of a design which will form part of our environment has a duty to develop his feeling for form, colour, texture, sensitivity to landscape and local atmosphere. In fact, he went further to say that any citizen has this duty, because in the end it's the general level of aesthetic awareness which determines the quality of an architectural epoch. Thank you.
I thought the talk was really interesting and it opened up a whole lot of points. What I really felt was it explained to us that good quality design is more than just aesthetics. It's more than architecture, it's more than engineering, it's a collaboration of everything. And the question I was keen to work out from him was, how is it that there's still a resistance by the professions, as we call them, to introducing contractors and subcontractors right at the beginning stages of the design? If we look at real quality over the years, these people have always been involved at the start. And I think if we can do more of that, then we're going to end up with far better design for the public.
We were saying amongst ourselves that it was a very brave field of Nigel to take on at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that you know, it could go in any direction, and having debate is a really good thing, and you know, we look forward to Dave's talk.
I really enjoyed it. I think that as an industry we don't take design seriously enough, and I think that is a responsibility that we all have. So I'm a Philistine building surveyor, and I know, but it actually makes it easier because I can facilitate, as a project manager, I can facilitate the design process, and a lot of the questions that came up are really useful to me because I was building plenty of time for thinking at the beginning of the project. I see one of your colleagues nodding, which is good, and I think when you get rushed and you say we need to go for planning in 6 weeks, the whole thing falls apart. So all of the things I heard make a lot of sense. Everyone has a responsibility for design, and we can do better than we do.
I think it's really kind of interesting. So I come from a contracting background, so
it was an interesting question.
It's an interesting question about contractors' involvement. We were just talking about project we're looking at in Islington. So you look at the model. So they've got a huge model of what the project will be, and how different people look at things from different perspectives.
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting just to explore those different perspectives. For me, you look at the art and you look at a pile of bricks, and a pile of bricks still looks like a pile of bricks to me. So, but I guess that's the practical background from which you come. But I think every aspect has a value in this overall process.
It was very good to get I suppose, an engineer's perspective on the aspect of design within the process. Because I'm an architect, so obviously it's sort of part of our daily lives. But and I think it's fundamental that the whole engineering process is integral to the design. So it's really inspiring just to hear someone talk about it. Fantastic images.
Well, I think it's great for Nigel to stick his head above the parapet on behalf of engineers to make people aware, for those who aren't aware, that engineers have a valid view on aesthetics, and that should be listened to and not ignored. I think it's, for me, being an engineer, formerly Arup, now at Foster's, for me it's a continuum. I think anyone who feels comfortable in expressing a view on aesthetics should be allowed to do so, and their view is as valid as anyone's, whether they're formally trained in architecture, fine arts, mechanical engineering or otherwise. In my view, the sorts of architecture you get, you can see by the end result whether engineering has actually had an impact on what the end result looks like, and I think the ones where engineering is more purely represented represents the better architecture in the end.